Bisi standing in front of the large school gate, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. Apata Grammar School in Ibadan was one of the top schools in the city, and getting admitted here felt like a huge achievement. Her parents were so proud, especially her mother, who had prayed endlessly for this day. Bisi had been raised in a strict Christian home where she was taught to follow the right path, respect elders, and stay close to God. As she entered the school compound, she couldn't help but admire the tall buildings and well-dressed students. Everything felt new, promising, and hopeful. But Bisi had no idea that her life was about to take a drastic turn. She was about to meet someone who would introduce her to a world of rebellion she never imagined. The first few weeks in school were uneventful. Bisi attended her classes, made a few friends, and kept to herself. However, one particular girl in her class caught her attention: Bola. She was bold and confident, and seemed to have a certain influence over the other students. Bola was always surrounded by a group of boys and girls who followed her around like she was some sort of queen. Bola's influence went far beyond her loud personality. She had a charisma that captivated everyone around her, especially the boys in the Wildcats gang. Unlike most girls at Apata Grammar School, Bola carried herself with an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. Her fearlessness in the face of both students and teachers earned her a reputation as someone who could not be easily intimidated. She had a sharp mind, quick wit, and an ability to assess situations instantly, which made her a natural leader. While many would assume that a male student might lead a group like the Wildcats, Bola defied those expectations. Her confidence and cleverness earned her the respect of the gang, even the boys, who admired her for always staying in control and keeping her head in tough situations. What made Bola's dominance even more untouchable was the influence her parents had in the community. They were powerful and wealthy, with connections that extended to the school's administration. Teachers often overlooked Bola's rebellious attitude and misconduct because they feared the consequences of confronting her. With her family's backing, Bola had the freedom to act with impunity, knowing that any trouble she caused would likely be swept under the rug. This protection only fueled her confidence and cemented her leadership, as even the Wildcats knew that Bola was untouchable, both in and out of school. She wasn't just the head of the gang because of her personality. Her connections and fearlessness made her an undeniable force at Apata Grammar School. One day after class, Bola approached Bisi. "Hey, you're Bisi, right? I've noticed you around. You seem cool," she said, flashing a wide smile. Bisi, surprised by the attention, smiled back nervously. Bola's friendship seemed like a good opportunity to fit in, but there was something about her that made Bisi hesitate. Bola wasn't like the other girls. There was an edge to her, something dark and dangerous. It didn't take long for Bisi to start hanging out with Bola. At first, their conversations were innocent, talking about school, boys, and music. But soon, Bola introduced Bisi to her close-knit group of friends. They were a wild bunch, always looking for trouble. They called themselves the Wildcats, and their reputation for bullying younger students and skipping classes was well known around the school. One afternoon, Bola invited Bisi to sit with them behind the school building. "We're having a little meeting. You should come," Bola said casually, as if it were no big deal. Bisi hesitated. She had never skipped a class or broken any school rules before, but the temptation to be part of something exciting, something bigger than herself, tugged at her. She nodded reluctantly, unaware that this decision would mark the beginning of her downward spiral. Bisi's heart raced as she sat with the Wildcats behind the school building. Bola and her friends were loud, carefree, and bold in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying to Bisi. They talked about pranks they pulled on other students and how they snuck out of school at night. For the first time, Bisi felt like she was part of something exciting, something different from her usual life of rules and restrictions. Suddenly, Bola leaned toward her and whispered, "We're going to teach one of those juniors a lesson after school. He's been acting all smart in front of the teachers. You in?" Bisi's heart skipped a beat. This was way beyond anything she'd ever done. She knew it was wrong, but the peer pressure was suffocating. She didn't want to seem weak or out of place in front of her new friends. With a shaky nod, she agreed. The school day ended, and the Wildcats gathered near the football field where the younger students usually hung out. Bola pointed out a boy named Tunde, who was known for being quiet and studious. He had accidentally spilled water on Bola's shoes earlier that day, and now he was their target. Bisi's stomach churned as she watched Bola and the others approach Tunde, cornering him like predators circling their prey. They pushed him around, called him names, and demanded he apologize for his disrespect. Tunde, terrified, apologized repeatedly, but Bola wasn't satisfied. She shoved him to the ground, and the group laughed cruelly. Bisi stood frozen, her conscience screaming at her to stop this, but she didn't. She just stood there, watching as Bola and the others bullied the innocent boy. It was her first taste of rebellion, and it left a bitter aftertaste. That night, Bisi couldn't sleep. The image of Tunde crying on the ground haunted her. She kept replaying the moment in her head, wondering why she hadn't done anything to stop it. This wasn't who she was. She had been raised to be kind, respectful, and honest, but now she felt like a stranger to herself. The guilt was unbearable, but she couldn't turn back now. She had already chosen this path. The next day, Bola acted like nothing had happened, laughing and joking as usual. Bisi, however, couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. She avoided Tunde's eyes whenever she passed him in the hallway. She wanted to apologize, but she was too ashamed. And deep down, she knew that apologizing would mean betraying Bola and the Wildcats. The fear of being rejected by them kept her silent. As the weeks went by, Bisi's involvement with the Wildcats deepened. At school, she was part of the gang, skipping classes, pulling pranks, and joining in on their bullying antics. But at home, she was still the obedient daughter her parents knew. She went to church every Sunday with her family, prayed with her mother every night, and pretended that everything was fine. Living this double life wasn't easy. Bisi often felt like she was being torn in two. Her parents had no idea about the things she was doing at school, and the thought of them finding out terrified her. But no matter how guilty she felt, she couldn't pull herself away from the excitement of being part of the Wildcats. The thrill of rebellion had a hold on her, and she didn't know how to break free. One afternoon, Bola introduced the gang to something new, something that made Bisi's heart race with fear. "We've been playing it safe for too long," Bola said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "It's time to take things up a notch. I know a guy who can get us alcohol." The group cheered, but Bisi felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had never even thought about drinking alcohol, and the idea terrified her. Bola noticed Bisi's hesitation and smirked. "What's the matter, Bisi? Too scared?" The others laughed, and Bisi's face flushed with embarrassment. She didn't want to drink, but she didn't want to look weak in front of her friends either. Reluctantly, she agreed to join them. This was the moment that would change everything, the moment when things would spiral out of control faster than Bisi could handle. The gang gathered in an abandoned building near the school, where Bola's friend had delivered a few bottles of alcohol. Bisi sat nervously, watching as her friends poured drinks and laughed carelessly. When it was her turn, she hesitated, her hands shaking as she held the cup. The smell of alcohol was strong, and her stomach churned with nausea. But the pressure from her friends was too much. "Come on, Bisi. Don't be such a baby," Bola teased. With a deep breath, Bisi took a sip, wincing as the bitter liquid burned her throat. The others cheered, but Bisi felt no sense of victory. Instead, a deep sense of dread settled in her chest. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and the consequences would soon follow. It wasn't long before the effects of her new lifestyle began to show. Bisi's grades started slipping. She was skipping more classes, missing assignments, and falling behind in subjects she once excelled at. Her teachers noticed the change, and so did her parents. They questioned her, but Bisi always found a way to dodge their concerns, blaming stress or school pressure. But deep down, Bisi knew the truth. She was losing control of her life, and it scared her. Bola and the Wildcats didn't seem to care about school or their future. They lived for the moment, indulging in reckless behavior without thinking about the consequences. And now, Bisi was trapped in that same cycle. Every step deeper into their world made it harder for her to find a way out. Days turned into weeks, and Bisi's life seemed to spiral further out of control. Her once neat and organized schoolwork was now a mess of missed assignments, half-hearted attempts, and low grades. She could feel the disappointment growing in her teacher's eyes. But what hurt the most was her parents' growing concern. Her mother, Yemi, frequently asked about her schoolwork, and her father, Adewale, who had always trusted Bisi, began to express his concerns as well. "Bisi, your grades are slipping. This isn't like you," her father said one evening during dinner. Yemi nodded in agreement, her face full of worry. "You used to be so focused. What's going on, Bisi?" Bisi felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. She wanted to tell them everything, that she had fallen into bad company, that she was struggling to stay afloat, but she couldn't. The words stayed stuck in her throat. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll do better, I promise." But inside, Bisi knew that things were far from fine. She was sinking deeper, and the fear of disappointing her parents kept her silent. Things only got worse when Bola introduced Bisi to another dangerous side of the Wildcats. They weren't just bullies, they were involved in stealing. It started small, with Bola and her crew taking money from the younger students or stealing snacks from the school canteen. But soon, they began stealing from shops outside the school compound. Bisi was horrified, but once again, she found herself trapped in a cycle of fear and pressure. One evening after school, Bola and the gang convinced Bisi to join them in stealing from a small grocery store nearby. "It's no big deal," Bola said casually. "We do this all the time, and we never get caught." Bisi's stomach twisted in knots. She knew it was wrong, deeply wrong, but she felt powerless to say no. The consequences of her choices were starting to pile up, and she was in too deep to see a way out. The day came when everything unraveled. Bisi and the Wildcats were at the small grocery store, pretending to browse when Bola gave the signal. Bisi's heart pounded in her chest as she slid a few snacks into her bag. It was all happening so fast, too fast. But just as they were about to leave, the store owner, a stern-looking man in his late 50s, caught them red-handed. "You, stop right there!" he yelled, grabbing Bola by the arm. Bisi froze in place, her body trembling with fear. The other girls scattered, running out of the store as fast as they could, but Bisi couldn't move. She was paralyzed with terror. The store owner dragged her and Bola back into the shop, calling the security guard. At that moment, Bisi knew her life was about to change in ways she couldn't undo. The news of the incident spread like wildfire throughout the school and neighborhood. Bisi's parents were called in, and the shame on their faces was unbearable. Yemi looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes, unable to understand how the once dedicated Christian girl had fallen into such disgrace. "What have you done, Bisi?" her mother asked, her voice shaking. "How did it come to this?" Bisi couldn't answer. She sat silently, her head bowed in shame, while her father spoke with the school principal. The store owner, though angry, agreed not to press charges, but Bisi and Bola were given harsh punishments. They were suspended from school for 2 weeks, and their parents were warned that any further misbehavior would result in expulsion. During her suspension, Bisi spent most of her days locked in her room, avoiding her parents and feeling the heavy weight of her mistakes. Her friends from the Wildcats didn't reach out to her, not even Bola. It was as if they had moved on without her, leaving her to deal with the fallout on her own. Bisi felt abandoned and lost. She had no one to talk to and no way to fix the mess she had made. The guilt weighed heavily on her soul. She thought about her mother's prayers and her father's quiet disappointment. Bisi had always been the good girl, the one they could count on, but now she had shattered their trust. She wondered if things would ever go back to the way they were, or if she had lost everything that mattered for good. As Bisi sat in her room during the long, lonely days of suspension, she began to reflect on how far she had fallen. She remembered the girl she used to be, the girl who loved studying, who dreamed of making her parents proud, who had big plans for her future. Now, all those dreams seemed so distant. She had allowed herself to be dragged down a path of destruction, and she didn't know how to get back to where she started. She thought about Bola and the Wildcats and how their influence had changed her. She realized that Bola wasn't a true friend. She had only used Bisi to feel powerful and in control. Bola didn't care about Bisi's future or her well-being. The realization hit hard, and Bisi felt a deep sense of regret for allowing herself to be so easily manipulated. One evening, Bisi's mother knocked softly on her door. "Bisi, can we talk?" Yemi's voice was gentle, but Bisi could hear the hurt in her tone. Reluctantly, Bisi opened the door and her mother stepped inside. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Yemi spoke, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Bisi, I don't understand what's happened to you. You used to be such a good girl." Bisi's heart ached as she listened to her mother's words. Yemi had always been so proud of her, and now Bisi had let her down in the worst possible way. "I'm sorry, Mama," Bisi whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad." But she knew that her apology wouldn't erase the pain she had caused. The damage was already done. Despite everything, Yemi refused to give up on her daughter. Over the next few days, she spent time praying with Bisi, encouraging her to ask for forgiveness and find her way back to the values she had once held so dear. Bisi, though still ashamed, began to realize that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fix things. Maybe her life wasn't completely ruined. With her mother's guidance, Bisi started to rebuild her relationship with God. She spent hours reading her Bible, searching for comfort and wisdom. Slowly, the guilt that had been suffocating her began to lift, and Bisi found herself praying for the strength to change. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long while, Bisi felt a glimmer of hope. When Bisi returned to school after her suspension, everything felt different. The whispers and stares from her classmates followed her everywhere she went. It was clear that her reputation had been tarnished. Even the teachers who used to praise her for her hard work now looked at her with disappointment. Bisi kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She knew she had to rebuild her life, but she didn't know where to start. Surprisingly, Bola approached her that afternoon, flashing her usual confident smile. "Glad you're back, Bisi. Don't worry about what people are saying. They'll forget soon enough." Bola's words sounded hollow to Bisi now. She had seen through the mask. Bola didn't care about her, and the life she had been living with the Wildcats was a dead end. This time, Bisi made a decision. She wasn't going back to that life. She was ready for a second chance, no matter how difficult it would be. Bola's influence still lingered like a shadow over Bisi's life. Although Bola acted like nothing had changed, Bisi couldn't forget the reality of their friendship, the manipulation, the pressure, and the wrong choices. When Bola tried to invite her to a hangout after school, Bisi finally stood up for herself. "I can't keep doing this, Bola," she said firmly, surprising even herself with her courage. "I need to focus on my life. I'm done with this gang." Bola was taken aback, her usual smirk fading into a frown. "What are you talking about? You're really going to abandon us now, after everything?" But Bisi was determined. She shook her head, standing her ground. "This isn't the life I want, Bola. I'm done." The words felt like a weight lifting off her chest, but she knew it wouldn't be the end of the trouble. Bisi's decision to leave the Wildcats didn't sit well with Bola or the rest of the gang. Bola wasn't used to people walking away from her, and her bruised ego meant trouble for Bisi. Over the next few days, Bola and her crew began spreading rumors about Bisi, calling her weak and a traitor. They whispered behind her back, laughed at her when she passed, and made her feel more isolated than ever. But Bisi was prepared for this. She knew the path to redemption wouldn't be easy, and she refused to let Bola's games pull her back into the darkness. For the first time in a long while, Bisi began focusing on her studies again, even though it was hard to catch up. She distanced herself from the toxic friendships and sought comfort in the words her mother had shared with her. "You can always find your way back." In the midst of her struggle, Bisi began to notice a few classmates who had always stayed in the background, students who weren't part of the popular crowd or involved in the gang scene. One of them was Ayo, a quiet and studious boy who often sat alone at lunch, reading or doing homework. He had always been kind to Bisi, even during her time with the Wildcats, but she had never paid him much attention. One afternoon, Bisi mustered the courage to sit with him at lunch. Ayo looked up from his book, surprised but welcoming. "Hey Bisi, how's it going?" he asked with a small smile. Bisi sighed, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness. "I've been better. I'm just trying to get my life back on track." Ayo nodded, understanding. They talked for the rest of lunch, and for the first time, Bisi felt like she had found a real friend, someone who didn't judge her for her past. Despite her newfound resolve to turn her life around, Bisi quickly realized that catching up on her schoolwork wasn't going to be easy. Her grades had taken a serious hit during her time with the Wildcats, and now she was struggling to understand concepts she had missed during her absence. Math, once her favorite subject, felt like a foreign language, and even English class, where she used to excel, seemed difficult to keep up with. Her teachers noticed her effort, but it was clear they were skeptical. "Bisi, you've fallen behind," her math teacher said during a private conversation after class. "It's going to take a lot of hard work to catch up, but I believe you can do it if you're serious." The words gave Bisi a glimmer of hope, but she knew the road ahead was long and filled with challenges. She wasn't going to give up, but she had to accept that redemption wouldn't come overnight. Bola wasn't the type to let things go. After Bisi left the Wildcats, Bola became even more hostile. One day after school, Bola cornered Bisi near the gate, her eyes filled with anger. "So, you think you're better than us now, huh? Just because you're pretending to be some good girl again?" Bola's voice dripped with venom. Bisi didn't flinch, but inside, her heart raced. "I'm not pretending," Bisi said calmly. "I just want to focus on my life and do what's right." But Bola wasn't ready to listen. She shoved Bisi against the wall, her gang standing behind her, watching. "You think you can just walk away and leave us? You'll regret it." The threat hung in the air, but Bisi didn't back down. She knew she had to stand firm in her decision, no matter how much pressure Bola put on her. The confrontation with Bola shook Bisi to her core. She knew that Bola wasn't bluffing. There would be consequences for walking away from the Wildcats, and Bisi feared what might happen next. That night, she lay in bed, unable to sleep, her mind racing with anxiety. What if Bola took things further? What if she got the gang to target her or her family? For the first time, Bisi realized that she couldn't handle this on her own. The next morning, she decided to confide in her parents. Sitting down with them at the breakfast table, she hesitated, unsure of how to start. But her mother sensed her distress. "Bisi, what's wrong?" Yemi asked gently. Bisi took a deep breath and told them everything, about Bola, the Wildcats, and the threats. Her parents listened quietly, their faces filled with concern. "We'll get through this together," her father said, his voice steady. "You're not alone, Bisi." After opening up to her parents, Bisi felt a sense of relief, but she knew that dealing with Bola's threats would require more than just support from her family. Her father suggested they speak with the school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Onifade, who had a reputation for being understanding and wise. Bisi agreed, although she was nervous about discussing her situation with someone outside her family. In her first meeting with Mrs. Onifade, Bisi poured her heart out, explaining everything she had been through, the bad decisions, the gang, and now the fear of retaliation. Mrs. Onifade listened carefully, her expression soft but serious. "Bisi, it takes a lot of courage to come forward and admit when you've made mistakes," she said kindly. "The important thing is that you're trying to make things right now. We'll work through this together." With the support of her parents and the school counselor, Bisi began to feel a little stronger each day. But she knew that sooner or later, she would have to confront Bola again. She couldn't keep running from her or the gang's threats. One afternoon after school, Bola and the Wildcats surrounded Bisi near the school's back gate, just as she had feared. But this time, Bisi was ready. "Bola, I'm done with this," Bisi said firmly, looking her former friend straight in the eye. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. You can spread your rumors, but I'm not going to live my life in fear of what you might do." Bola sneered, but there was something in Bisi's tone that gave her pause. "You really think you can just walk away from us?" Bola spat, but Bisi held her ground. "Yes, I can, and I will." Bisi's bold stand against Bola didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the Wildcats. For the first time, they began to question Bola's leadership. If Bisi could walk away, why couldn't they? One by one, members of the gang started to drift away, tired of Bola's constant control and the trouble she brought into their lives. Bola, realizing she was losing her grip on the group, became desperate, trying harder to maintain her influence. But the damage was done. Bola's once strong hold over the Wildcats was crumbling. Without her loyal followers, Bola was left isolated, and the school began to turn against her. Students who had once feared her now avoided her, and teachers who had overlooked her behavior before began to crack down. Bola had always believed she was untouchable, but now she was learning the hard way that every choice has consequences. As Bola's influence in the school waned, so did the rumors and gossip about Bisi. At first, it was difficult for her to face her classmates each day, knowing that many of them had judged her harshly for her association with the Wildcats. But slowly, things began to change. Some of her classmates started to notice the effort Bisi was putting into turning her life around. Teachers who had once looked at her with disappointment now saw her determination to improve. One day, as Bisi walked through the hallways, a girl from her class named Sade approached her. "Hey Bisi, I just wanted to say, I'm really impressed with how you've handled everything. It takes a lot of strength to do what you did." Bisi was taken aback, but grateful for the kind words. She smiled, feeling a sense of relief. It seemed that the cloud of judgment that had followed her for so long was finally beginning to lift. Despite the small victories at school, Bisi knew that rebuilding the trust she had lost with her parents was going to be a longer process. Her mother, Yemi, had always been proud of Bisi's dedication and faith, and the disappointment she felt when Bisi strayed from the path was evident. But Yemi was also a woman of deep faith, and she believed in forgiveness and redemption. Over the following weeks, Bisi made a conscious effort to regain her parents' trust. She helped out more around the house, spent time with her younger siblings, and attended church services with her family without complaint. Her parents noticed the changes and were cautiously hopeful, but there was still a distance between them. Bisi knew it would take time for that gap to close, but she was committed to proving herself. In her quest to turn her life around, Ayo became one of Bisi's strongest sources of support. The quiet, bookish boy had become her closest friend, and his calm, level-headed nature was exactly what Bisi needed during this challenging time. Ayo was patient with her, helping her catch up on her studies and encouraging her to stay focused. One afternoon, as they sat in the school library working on a math problem, Ayo looked up at Bisi and smiled. "You know, I've always believed you were more than what people said about you. It's good to see you living up to your potential." Bisi blushed, feeling a warm sense of gratitude. "Thanks, Ayo. I don't think I could have gotten through all of this without you," she said sincerely. Ayo shrugged modestly, but Bisi could see the pride in his eyes. With Ayo's help and her own determination, Bisi began to focus intensely on her studies. She knew that the only way to truly regain her parents' trust and her teachers' respect was through hard work and commitment. She spent hours after school in the library, catching up on the topics she had missed during her time with the Wildcats. It wasn't easy, but she slowly started to see progress. Her grades, which had plummeted during her time with the gang, began to improve. Her math teacher, who had once expressed disappointment in her, now saw her efforts and started to encourage her. "I can see you're working hard, Bisi," he said one day after class. "Keep this up, and you'll be back on track in no time." Bisi felt a surge of pride. She was finally on the path to redemption. As Bisi worked to rebuild her life, she also began to reconnect with her family. Her younger siblings, Kemi and Tolu, had always looked up to her, and during her time with the Wildcats, she had distanced herself from them. But now, she made a conscious effort to spend more time with them, helping Kemi with her homework, playing games with Tolu, and simply being present in their lives. Her parents noticed the change. Though her mother was still cautious, Bisi could see the softening in her eyes. One evening, while they were preparing dinner together, Yemi turned to Bisi and said, "I've been praying for you, Bisi. I can see the change in you. Keep going, my daughter. You're finding your way back." Bisi's heart swelled with emotion. It was the first time in months that she felt a real connection with her mother again. Just when Bisi thought she was free from Bola's grip, Bola made one final attempt to pull her back into the gang's world. One afternoon after school, Bola cornered Bisi outside the gates. "I hear you've been acting like a saint lately," Bola said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But don't forget, Bisi, you owe me. We looked out for you when no one else did." Bisi stood her ground, her heart racing. She knew this was her moment to completely break free from Bola's influence. "I don't owe you anything, Bola," Bisi said firmly. "I made my own choices, and now I'm making better ones. I'm done with the Wildcats, and I'm done with you." Bola's face twisted in anger, but Bisi didn't flinch. She had finally found her strength, and nothing Bola said could change that. As graduation approached, Bisi reflected on everything she had been through over the past year. She had made mistakes, big ones, but she had also found the courage to turn her life around. The future, once clouded with uncertainty and regret, now seemed full of possibility. She was determined to move forward, to leave her past behind, and to make the most of the second chance she had been given. One evening, as she sat with Ayo by the school's football field, watching the sunset over the city, she smiled. "I don't know what the future holds, but I feel ready for it," she said quietly. Ayo nodded, his calm presence reassuring as always. "You've come a long way, Bisi. Whatever happens next, I know you'll be just fine." Meanwhile, Bola's downfall continued. With most of the Wildcats abandoning her, she was left isolated and struggling to maintain her reputation as the school's queen bee. The teachers, who had once turned a blind eye to her behavior, were now cracking down hard on her. Detentions piled up, and her grades, which had never been stellar, began to sink even lower. Bola tried to maintain her bravado, but it was clear that the consequences of her choices were catching up with her. One day, after yet another confrontation with a teacher, Bola found herself sitting alone in the principal's office. For the first time, she realized that she was losing control, not just of the gang, but of her own life. It was a harsh lesson, one that Bola had never expected to learn. As Bisi focused on her academics and future, she began to see new opportunities open up for her. She applied to several universities, hoping to study law, a dream her parents had always encouraged. But this time, it wasn't about fulfilling their expectations. It was about finding a new purpose for herself. Bisi wanted to use her experiences to help others, especially young people like herself, who had been led astray. One day, she received a letter from a prestigious university offering her a scholarship based on her academic improvement and her personal essay, in which she had detailed her journey of redemption. Bisi was overjoyed. This was the fresh start she had been working so hard for, and she was determined to make the most of it. As Bisi prepared for graduation, she knew she had to say goodbye to the past once and for all. She had come a long way from the girl who had fallen into the wrong crowd and made poor choices. Now, she was ready to step into a future filled with hope and promise, but there was still one thing she needed to do before she could fully move on. One afternoon, she sought out Tunde, the boy she and the Wildcats had bullied earlier in the year. He had been avoiding her ever since the incident, but Bisi knew she needed to make things right. "Tunde, I'm really sorry for what happened. I was wrong, and I want you to know that I regret it," she said earnestly. Tunde looked at her, surprised but grateful. "Thanks, Bisi. It means a lot to hear that." With that, Bisi felt a sense of closure. She was truly ready to move forward. Graduation day arrived with a mix of excitement and nostalgia. As Bisi stood in line with her classmates, dressed in her cap and gown, she couldn't help but think of how far she had come. The path had been difficult, filled with mistakes and lessons, but it had shaped her into the person she was now. Looking out into the crowd, she spotted her parents, smiling proudly. Her mother waved, her eyes filled with tears of joy. When Bisi's name was called, she walked across the stage with confidence. She had earned this moment, and it was one she would cherish forever. As she accepted her diploma, the audience erupted into applause, and for the first time in a long while, Bisi felt a deep sense of pride in herself. After graduation, Bisi's life took on a new rhythm. She spent the summer preparing for university, excited about the opportunities that lay ahead. She had also applied for an internship at a local law firm, where she hoped to gain experience and begin working toward her dream of becoming a lawyer. The thought of helping others, especially young people like herself, filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. But Bisi knew that she couldn't achieve her dreams alone. With the support of her family and Ayo by her side, she felt ready to take on whatever challenges came her way. As she packed her bags for the next chapter of her life, Bisi smiled. The future beckoned, and this time, she was ready for it. As Bisi prepared for her new journey in life, she carried with her the lessons she had learned along the way. From a lost teenager who had almost thrown away her future to a determined young woman on the brink of a promising career, Bisi knew that anything was possible with faith, perseverance, and the support of those who truly cared about her. The mistakes of the past no longer defined her. They had shaped her, taught her and ultimately led her to where she needed to be. With hope in her heart and her sights set on a bright future, Bisi was ready to embrace whatever came next.
Thank you so much for watching this story and joining us on this journey through Bisi's challenges at Apata Grammar School. We hope you found the twists and turns in her encounters with Bola and the Wildcats as captivating as we did. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Now we'd love to hear from you. What do you think about Bola's influence and the choices Bisi has to make? How would you have handled a friend like Bola? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Your feedback helps us create even better content, so don't hesitate to share your opinions.